That night, London drank like mad. The streets were filled with celebration for the king's return. But behind the windows of Whitehall, another kind of festivity was unfolding, far more dangerous. Into those halls stepped a woman whose name that very morning no one had even known: Barbara Villiers. Within an hour, the entire court was speaking of her. She was neither noble nor wealthy, yet she walked in as though the palace had always been hers. No bow, no pearls, only the certainty that the man on the throne already belonged to her. Charles II broke off mid-conversation. No one before her had ever looked at the king with such calm defiance. A week later, she was his mistress. A month later, the most powerful woman in England. Barbara was born in poverty. Her father died for the king. Her mother sold jewels just to feed the children. She learned early, if you wanted power, you took it through those who held the sword. At 18, she married the Catholic Roger Palmer. But even then, everyone knew marriage wasn't her goal. The court was. When Charles returned from exile, she was the first to appear at his reception. Chronicles wrote she wore a gown the color of wine, and that every other woman in the hall vanished. From that evening on, she needed no introduction. Barbara quickly understood. Charles didn't crave submission, he craved danger. She didn't play a part, she challenged him. She argued with him at the table, laughed at his ministers, staged scenes right in council, and he adored her for it, far more than he ever loved 100 docile favorites. Charles gave her the title Duchess of Cleveland, estates, even a ship named Barbara. In return, she gave him not just her body, but power. Petitions, pleas, and letters from ministers passed through her hands. The French paid her to back an alliance with Louis XIV. The Spanish paid for her silence. Ambassador Colbert wrote, "She is worth more than an army." Her influence grew so vast that Parliament once debated whether a royal mistress could be banished if she was, in effect, running the country. They found no answer. She knew the value of every gift. It was said that each morning, leaving the king's chambers, she left him a short note with a single name. The very next day, that man received a post. Barbara never hid her power. When a bishop dared to call her the seductress of the throne, she replied, "If God is against women having power, why did he give it to me?" She bore Charles 5 children, each one a coin of influence. Officially recognized, titled, and endowed, they turned her from mistress into dynasty. Even her enemies admitted no woman had ever ruled England so openly through a royal bed. When one lady at court whispered, "She is destroying the throne," Barbara only smiled. "I've merely cleared away what kept it from standing firm." Thus began her age, the age of a woman who turned passion into politics. With Barbara's arrival, the court erupted. She wasn't just sharing the king's bed, she was steering his government. That made her a threat to every man in the room. The chief minister, the Earl of Clarendon, tried to stop her. He warned Charles, "Your Majesty, you are giving England to a woman," to which the king replied, "Then let her see if she can govern it better than you." Barbara understood at once. The real battle was not for love, but for the seat beside the throne. She built a web of influence. Her allies were generals, bankers, even priests. Anyone seeking the king's ear had to pass through her first. She received envoys in her boudoir, granted audiences at midnight, kept men waiting 6 hours in corridors, only to dismiss them with a smile. Humiliation was her weapon. Once, the French envoy Colbert came with an offer. Louis XIV would pay her £10,000 a year to support French interests. She accepted. The money didn't go to luxury, but to espionage.
With gifts and whispers, she controlled the flow of information, deciding what reached Charles and what did not. Her enemies accused her of treason, but Charles only laughed. When Parliament raised the issue of her influence, he quipped, "If my lords worked as hard at their duties as they do at watching my bedroom, I would rule an empire." Meanwhile, resentment grew in Whitehall. Barbara mocked Queen Catherine of Braganza, ridiculed her accent, once even wore a gown in the colors of Portugal's flag to remind everyone who the foreigner here is. The Queen wept, but Charles brushed it off. Let Barbara play at war, so long as she doesn't demand a minister's head. Yet in this war, Barbara was winning. By 1662, only 2 years after the Restoration, her power was so complete that ministers whispered, no title or office could be gained without her consent. When rumors spread that she meddled in the nation's finances, she coolly replied, "I don't interfere, I only decide who does." Servants feared to speak her name. Women at court either copied her or hated her. Fashion shifted to the Barbara style. Dark gowns, loose hair, a defiant gaze. She was the first woman in English history whose behavior set the standard for society itself. Scandals multiplied. They said she slapped the king in public, that she hurled account books at him, that she ordered eunuchs to bar ministers from his rooms until she finished breakfast. No one could prove it, but everyone wanted to retell it. And every rumor only fed her legend. The woman even the king feared. When Barbara gave birth to a son, Charles granted the boy the title Earl of Southampton. It was a direct challenge to every law. Illegitimate children now received land, titles, and power. England whispered that the country was ruled by a queen without a crown. But in those same years, her weakness began to appear. She was used to control, yet around her, new intrigues were taking shape. Younger mistresses, ambitious ministers, foreign envoys, each one wanted to see her fall. Barbara failed to notice. The higher she climbed, the more people waited at the foot of the ladder, ready for her to slip. And yet, as long as her laughter echoed through the palace corridors, no one dared raise their voice. England belonged to the woman who had turned passion into politics and power into a game without rules.
By the late 1660s, Barbara believed herself untouchable. But at that very moment, a young woman appeared at court who, at first glance, seemed harmless, a pale French girl named Louise de Querouaille. She had been sent by Louis XIV's diplomats, officially as a lady-in-waiting, unofficially as a weapon. The French court had grown tired of paying Barbara for influence and decided to replace her with their own puppet. Barbara saw it immediately. From the first day, Louise didn't stir jealousy, but irritation. She spoke softly, wore modest gowns, but behind it all was calculation. Charles, used to Barbara's storm, suddenly turned his gaze toward a woman who whispered instead of shouting. Louise never argued, she waited, and Barbara always struck first. Once, seeing the king admire his new favorite, Barbara stood in the middle of the hall and declared loudly, "Your Majesty, if you want porcelain, why keep a flame beside you?" Charles laughed it off, but the courtiers froze. Everyone felt it. War had begun. The French envoy, Colbert, wrote to Louis, "Madame Palmer will not yield without blood." He was right. Barbara launched her own campaign against Louise. She spread rumors that she was a spy, bribed guards to slip letters under the king's door, and one night stormed into Louise's chambers to throw Charles's jewels in her face. "Take them if you wish, but can you hold his eyes?" These scenes spilled into the streets. In tavern songs, Barbara was called the English Venus with fangs. Women despised her. Men adored her.
Each scandal turned her into a legend. But even legends grow old. In 1668, she staged the loudest scandal of the decade. At a royal ball, upon learning Charles had spent the night with Louise, Barbara burst in, grabbed his cloak, and shouted before everyone, "So this is who governs the ting now? France?" Then she fainted on the spot. The effect was immediate. Parliament buzzed. The people muttered of French control. Charles was forced to act. He didn't want to lose Barbara. Too many years, too many secrets. But he could no longer endure her outbursts. The next day, he ordered her to leave Whitehall for rest. The wording was diplomatic, but the meaning was clear. Barbara left not in tears, but with dignity. She took her children, her jewels, and a collection of papers, including ministers' correspondence. She knew her weapon now was not her body, but her memory. Exile did not stop her. On the edge of London, she opened her own salon. Merchants, spies, writers, politicians, all who resented the king gathered there. Barbara no longer slept with power, she listened to it. Her home became an alternative court. Here rumors were exchanged, fates decided, secret deals struck. While London burned in the Great Fire and the kingdom sank into chaos, contemporaries said only Barbara knew who sold whom yesterday and who would sell whom tomorrow.
When Parliament again tried to accuse her of spying for France, she only laughed. If I served the French, they would already rule England. Her influence didn't vanish. It became a shadow. Ministers still came to her for advice. Even Charles sometimes sent her notes. "Do you still hear what they say of me in the streets?" She always replied, "Always." Though Louise de Querouaille officially became mistress, the real power remained with the woman who had already proved a woman without a throne could still govern a king. After her exile, Barbara vanished from the palace, but not from London. Her name still echoed in corridors, in Parliament's back rooms, in diplomats' letters. She no longer entered the king's chambers, but she entered the minds of those who did. Leaving court, she became more dangerous than ever. In her house on Pall Mall, she built a new center of gravity. It wasn't just a salon, it was an intelligence network. Ministers, angry with Charles, bankrupt aristocrats, gamblers, journalists, Frenchmen, Dutchmen, all came. Barbara received them not as hostess, but as judge. She listened, remembered, and kept their secrets. Over wine, fates of marriages, offices, and treaties were sealed. Her enemies tried to convince the king she was collecting blackmail. They were right. Barbara knew who took bribes, who received letters from Paris, who whispered with Jacobites. She built an archive, chests filled with records marked with numbers instead of names. Chroniclers wrote that when one servant tried to run off with a chest, he was found 2 days later, and no one ever dared touch her things again. Rumors of her black library spread like wildfire. Some claimed she kept Charles's own letters discussing secret deals with France. Others swore the confessions of corrupt ministers were inside. When one of them, Sir Thomas Osborne, tried to dismiss the gossip, Barbara declared publicly, "I hold a page on which your fear is written in your own hand." He never spoke again. Barbara came to understand that her true power was no longer her body, but her words. Her tongue was sharper than any dagger. She no longer hurled glasses or slammed doors. She destroyed reputations. A single phrase from her lips could end a career. "I don't need a throne when I have the throne's ears," she would say. But she never gave up luxury. Her carriages were grander than the king's, her servants dressed finer than ministers.
She hosted balls where those afraid to appear at court came instead. There, in the half-light of candles, men wove their plots, while Barbara simply listened. One envoy wrote, "She sits in her chair like a sovereign without a crown. Even in exile, she remains the queen of sin and of secrets."
With time, she turned her own scandal into a brand. Newspapers wrote of her with hatred, yet printed her every word. Once, when a preacher thundered against her as the whore of Babylon, Barbara sent him a purse of gold and a note for the advertisement. By 1670, she was once again orbiting power through back channels. Her daughter Anne, born to Charles, married the Duke of Grafton. Another son took a military post. A third became a courtier. Each child was an anchor, pulling the Palmer name back into palace corridors. When Charles fell gravely ill, Barbara returned to him not as mistress, but as memory. No one knows what she said at his bedside that night, but courtiers recorded one thing: the king wept. Her journey was ending, but her myth was only beginning. Newspapers of the time claimed Barbara Palmer had destroyed England's morality. Historians later added, she only revealed that morality never existed. She became the archetype of the royal mistress, the woman who turned sin into diplomacy. After her, no mistress of a monarch could ever be just a mistress. Each had to be a strategist. And London still whispered, without Barbara, Charles would not even have had the throne he sat on. Over time, her name became legend, but a legend people looked away from. She no longer glittered in Whitehall, but everyone who had known her at court understood. If a rumor spread through London, it had likely started with her. She became an invisible force, a power in the shadows. After Charles's death, she was urged to leave England. Too many enemies, too many debts. But Barbara stayed. She knew the country would not forget the woman who once held a monarch in her fist. She moved into a country house at Chiswick, but even there, ambassadors, bankers, and politicians came seeking her counsel. She could see through people. A French priest who visited her in these years wrote, "She speaks of politics as others speak of sins, and of sins as others speak of politics. To her, everything is a game." He was right. Barbara had turned her own reputation into a weapon. She knew her vice was her armor. But others had taken her place at court. Louise de Carawa was now the official mistress, younger, more delicate, backed by Louis XIV. Barbara watched her with a cold smile. "She has beaten me," she admitted, "but I taught her how to win." Meanwhile, religious storms swept England. Preachers once again denounced the great corruption of Charles's reign, and Barbara's name appeared in every pamphlet. She no longer defended herself. When someone sent her a caricature in a leaflet, she simply said, "The artist flatters me. I was worse." Her finances crumbled. She spent more than she had, lost estates, sold jewels, but even in poverty she refused humiliation. When one creditor threatened her with court, Barbara replied, "I have seen kings fall. Do you think I fear you?" Even in old age, she remained dangerous. Rumors claimed she kept Charles's secret letters hidden in a monastery in France, and proof of ministers' corruption locked away. No one knew if it was true, but the fear kept everyone obedient. Her home became a strange place, half archive, half shadow of the past. It smelled of wine, paper, and lavender. She welcomed guests, told them stories of the court, sometimes laughing, "I did not ruin England, I only showed who was really building it." Once, a young writer came to collect material on Charles II.
He expected an old woman, but found sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Barbara told him, "Remember this, young man, power is not a throne. It is the moment when a king whispers your name before making his decision." The writer later published her words, and it was that phrase which survived the centuries. By the end of her life, Barbara no longer sought attention. She had become the ghost of an era, the last reminder of a time when England chose between freedom and desire. When she died, there was no grand funeral, but years later, historians found her tombstone with no arms, no titles, only 2 lines. She loved a king and ruled him. Her story ended, but her shadow lived on in every court of Europe where a woman tried to turn passion into strategy. Barbara Palmer did not vanish with the age of Charles II. She became its ghost, an invisible school of power for all who came after. Her name was whispered in talk of French royal mistresses, Russian empresses, the lovers of popes and dukes. Whenever a woman risked everything for influence, someone would murmur, "She walks the road of Barbara." In English history, for centuries, she was written down in a single line, one of the king's mistresses. But in truth, she was the first woman to openly turn intimacy into politics, seduction into a tool, gossip into a weapon. While men drafted parliamentary acts, Barbara wrote the script of a new kind of power, female, amoral, but real. In a world where women were forbidden to speak, she made an entire kingdom listen to her whisper, and that whisper shaped decisions that changed England. They called her the face of corruption, but it was her games that kept Charles II on the throne, helped him survive plots, and balanced the fragile peace between Catholics and Protestants. She destroyed not out of whim, but calculation. Each scandal distracted from more dangerous intrigues. Each tantrum covered someone else's secret deal. Later, Puritan historians tried to erase her from the chronicles, but she could not be erased. In the archives remain bills, letters, intercepted reports, all marked with her hand. She left her trace in places where women weren't even allowed to stand. With time, legend reshaped her. Some called her a witch, others a political genius. The truth lay somewhere in between. She was a woman who understood too soon that the body was currency, and if the state treated women as coins, then the cleverest among them must become the bank.
By the 18th century, when writers created the figure of the femme fatale, they took her portrait as their model. The courtesans of novels, the seductresses of London's stage, all echoed back to her. Barbara had become an archetype that outlived the Puritans and outlasted the return of morality. Her descendants carried her mark as well. One became an admiral, another a counselor to George I. A granddaughter married into a noble line that tied England to continental aristocracy. In every union there was a whisper, the blood of Barbara Palmer. But her true legacy was not names or titles. It was the very idea that power belongs to whoever can command attention. Barbara commanded the attention of the king, of society, even of her enemies. Everyone knew her. No one could fully understand her. Read the chronicles closely and a pattern emerges. After every mention of one of her scandals comes an important act of state, as though each scandal was a smokescreen. Coincidence? Or had she deliberately steered Charles toward decisions, hiding politics under the mask of passion? That mystery remains unsolved. But perhaps that is why women like Barbara always frighten historians. They do not fit into categories. They are not mistresses. They are co-authors of power. Today, in a museum in Cleveland, her portrait by Peter Lely still hangs. In it, she is neither temptress nor sinner. She sits calmly, almost contemplative. Her gaze is weary but knowing. A faint smile plays on her lips, not for the viewer but for herself. Pearls rest at her neck, and her mouth lingers the shadow of triumph. Curators say the painting always stirs a strange reaction in visitors. Some see beauty, some danger, but none pass by untouched. And that may be the truest measure of her power. She forces you to look. Barbara Palmer remained in history not as a fallen woman, but as the first media magnate of the 17th century, the one who understood that attention was worth more than gold. And if anyone today dares say power and passion cannot coexist, one only has to remember her name, for she proved the opposite. She loved a king and ruled a kingdom.